I stared at the voicemail notification, the glowing screen illuminating the cramped airplane cabin. It felt surreal looking back at the text thread that ignited this war. After years in the military, I was coming home for Christmas, but Dad said I wasn't welcome. I replied. 5 days later, I had 10 missed calls and one from a lawyer. It was too late to undo. The engines hummed a vibrating lullaby, but my heart pounded a frantic rhythm. I wasn't just returning to civilian life, I was returning to a crime scene. 4 years of sand, sweat, and discipline had led to this moment. I spent 8 months dreaming of the snow, covered pines on our family farm. Every month, like clockwork, I wired $3,000 to my father's account. I told myself I was buying security, investing in the legacy my grandfather built. I ate MREs and skipped leave to ensure the barn roof got fixed and the taxes were paid. I thought I was the savior of the homestead. I didn't realize I was just the bank. The wheels touched down on the tarmac with a violent screech that mirrored my internal state. Passengers around me scrambled for overhead bins, eager to embrace wives and children. I remained seated, clutching my duffel bag, waiting for the crowd to thin. I had imagined a banner. Maybe a hug from my stepmother. Or a firm handshake from Dad acknowledging my service. Instead, my phone buzzed with that singular, devastating message. It wasn't a greeting. It was a perimeter breach warning from inside the wire. I unlocked the screen, the blue light harsh against my tired eyes. The message from Dad was brief and brutally efficient. Don't come to the house. Get a hotel. There was no welcome home, just a logistical directive to stay away. I felt the familiar coldness of combat focus wash over me. The hurt didn't register yet. It was pushed down, compartmentalized behind a wall of tactical assessment. He didn't want his daughter. He wanted the convenient distance he had grown accustomed to. My thumb hovered over the banking app. I had a Christmas bonus transfer queued up. $5,000 intended for a new tractor down payment. It sat there, pending, a digital offering of peace and loyalty. I looked at the rejection text again. Get a hotel. The words burned. I didn't argue. I didn't beg for my room back. Simply typed, fine, and switched back to the bank tab. I hit delete on the transfer. The loading circle spun, erasing the money he was counting on. I walked through the terminal, ignoring the festive wreaths and the tearful reunions happening around me. I hailed a cab outside, the winter air biting at my exposed neck. The driver asked where I was heading, and I gave him the name of a motel 3 towns over. I turned my phone off completely. No location data, no calls. If I was a stranger to them, my money and my presence would be too. The silence I chose was heavy, expensive, and absolute. The motel room smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and stale cigarettes. I threw my heavy duffel bag onto the stiff mattress and sat at the wobbly desk. My laptop screen glowed blue in the dim light, the only window into the life I had financed from 6,000 miles away. I wasn't crying. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I needed hard intel. I cracked my knuckles, took a breath, and logged into the joint bank account. The numbers on the screen blurred into a sickening spreadsheet of betrayal. I scrolled past the monthly $3,000 deposits I had labeled farm maintenance. I expected to see lumber costs, roofing contractors, or maybe a new feed bill. Instead, I saw charges for a local steakhouse, a tropical travel agency, and a series of payments to a luxury car dealership. My stomach turned over. The barn roof wasn't leaking. My family was hemorrhaging my money on a lifestyle I didn't share. I clicked on the dealership transaction details to see exactly what I bought. It was a lease payment for a brand new sedan, the kind with heated leather seats and a sunroof. Meanwhile, I had spent the last 4 winters sleeping in a canvas tent with a sleeping bag rated for sub-0 temperatures. The disparity wasn't just unfair. It was theft disguised as family obligation. They weren't struggling to keep the land. They were struggling to maintain an image. My hands didn't shake as I navigated to the recurring transfers tab. Discipline took over, the same cold efficiency I used to strip a rifle. There it was. The mortgage payment scheduled for the first of the month. It was the lifeline that kept the bank from foreclosing on the house I wasn't allowed to enter. I selected the line item. The screen asked if I was sure. I didn't hesitate. I clicked Cancel Series and watched it vanish. I didn't stop at the mortgage. I went down the list like a surgeon removing necrotic tissue. The electric bill, the heating oil delivery, the internet service, all of it was set to autopay from my direct deposit. I canceled every single one. Then I opened a new tab for my military pension portal. With a few keystrokes, I rerouted my paycheck to a private savings account. The financial tourniquet was now tight, cutting off the circulation to their comfort. Just as I was about to log out, a notification banner caught my eye at the top of the dashboard. It was an alert regarding a pending document. I clicked it, expecting a tax form. It was a loan application for a cash-out refinance on the farm, totaling $200,000. My father had already filled out the paperwork. All it needed was the co-signer's electronic signature. My signature. He wasn't just spending my cash, he was selling my future. The audacity took my breath away. He wanted to strip the equity from the land, while banning me from stepping foot on it. I moved the cursor to the Decline button. I didn't just click it. I slammed my finger down on the trackpad. The application status switched to Void. I shut the laptop, plunging the room back into darkness. The money had stopped flowing at midnight. Now, in the silence of this cheap motel, I waited for the scream. Sunlight hit the cheap motel curtains, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the dead air. I woke up to a phone that was vibrating itself off the nightstand. I watched it dance across the wood veneer, buzzing like an angry hornet. The screen lit up with, "Dad," over and over again. It was December 23rd. The mortgage transfer usually cleared by 9 in the morning. It was now 9:15. He wasn't calling to wish me a Merry Christmas. He was calling because the ATM had finally stopped dispensing cash. I let it go to voicemail and picked up the device only when it went still. The notifications stacked up on the lock screen like overdue bills. The first text was a feigned concern asking if I was okay. 10 minutes later, the tone shifted into a demand. He texted that the bank was acting up and the payment hadn't gone through. I didn't feel the urge to reply. I felt a grim satisfaction. For years, I jumped at every ping. Today, I just swiped the notifications away. Staying in the room felt like hiding, and I was done hiding. I pulled on a heavy coat and a beanie, obscuring my face. I drove my rental car to a diner on the edge of town, where the coffee tasted like battery acid and nostalgia. The bell above the door jingled. A sound straight from my childhood. I took a cracked vinyl booth in the back, facing the door. It was habit. You never sit with your back to the entrance. Even in your hometown. The waitress was new, a high school girl with braces and too much eyeliner. She poured my coffee without looking at me. She asked for my order while popping gum, completely indifferent to my existence. She didn't recognize the girl, who used to study AP chemistry in this exact booth. I was a ghost in my own history. It was better this way. If she knew who I was, she might ask about the big homecoming party my father had supposedly planned. A party I wasn't invited to. My phone vibrated against the formica table, rattling the silverware. I glanced down at the screen. My father texted again, shouting in all caps that vendor checks were bouncing, and it was embarrassing. I took a sip of the bitter black coffee. Embarrassment was a mild side effect compared to what I felt. He wasn't worried about my safety or my feelings. He was worried about his reputation. The panic in his texts was palpable. He was realizing that without my signature, he was just a man with empty pockets. The door opened again, letting in a gust of freezing wind. Old Mr. Miller shuffled in, stomping snow off his boots. He looked exactly the same as he did 10 years ago. Worn and weathered like an old fence post. He stopped at my booth, squinting through thick glasses. He asked if it was really me. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, and nodded slowly. He leaned in close. He told me welcome home, adding that my dad had been bragging all week about the big sale. I lowered my fork, my appetite gone instantly. I asked him what sale he was talking about, keeping my voice even. Mr. Miller chuckled, shaking his head. He said, my dad was selling to those condo developers and cashing out after Christmas. He told everyone I had signed off on it. The blood roared in my ears, drowning out the diner chatter. He wasn't just using my money to fund his life. He was planning to erase the farm entirely. He wasn't just excluding me. He was liquidating my heritage. Christmas Eve morning broke with a gray, leaden sky. I sat in my rental car, watching steam rise from my coffee cup. My phone screen was a battlefield. 10 missed calls from my father and a string of erratic voicemails. Then, a new number flashed across the glass. It wasn't my father. It was a local area code labeled Henderson Law. My stomach dropped. I assumed my father had escalated his panic into a lawsuit. I took a deep breath and braced myself. I answered with a sharp, "Hello," my voice defensive. A gravelly voice responded, identifying himself as Arthur Henderson. I braced for a cease and desist or a demand for support on my father's behalf. I told him I wasn't paying another dime, and any attempt to coerce me would be met with legal counsel. Henderson laughed, a dry, dusty sound. He clarified immediately that he wasn't calling for my father. He was calling on behalf of my late grandfather. Confusion must have been evident in my silence because he continued quickly. He explained he was the executor of the estate trust, established 10 years ago. He asked if I was aware of the specific stipulations regarding the deed transfer. I admitted I hadn't looked the paperwork since deployment. I trusted my father to handle the administration. That was my mistake. Henderson said he tried reaching me for weeks, but my father claimed I was unreachable overseas. Henderson's tone hardened as he dropped the next piece of intel. He confirmed what Mr. Miller whispered in the diner. My father had initiated a sale contract with the developer. However, the title company flagged the transaction because my signature was missing. Henderson said my father presented a power of attorney document yesterday. It looked authentic, but the date was from a time when I was verified to be on a transport plane. It was a clumsy forgery. The forgery was bad, but the trust terms were worse for my father. Henderson asked me to pull over. He read from the reversion clause in the original will. It stated clearly that my father's life tenancy on the farm was conditional. It remained valid only so long as the property served as the primary residence and welcome sanctuary for all direct blood heirs. If an heir was denied access, the life tenancy dissolved immediately. The power shifted instantly. My mind raced back to the text message, sitting in my inbox like a smoking gun. I asked Henderson if a digital communication counted as proof of denial. He paused, shuffling papers. He told me that a written directive to stay away was legally binding evidence of exclusion. By telling me to get a hotel, my father hadn't just been cruel. He had triggered a legal tripwire that stripped him of his rights. He had accidentally evicted himself. The realization hit me harder than a physical blow. I wasn't a guest begging for a room anymore. I was the landlord. Henderson told me. He needed the text message to file the emergency motion. I agreed to meet him at his office in 20 minutes. I hung up and stared at the steering wheel. My father thought he was playing chess with my money. He didn't realize he had just knocked over his own king. It was too late to undo. Henderson's office smelled of mahogany and old dust. He laid the documents out on the heavy desk like tarot cards. The forgery was clumsy. My signature looked shaky, like a child tracing lines they didn't understand. He pointed a manicured finger to the date. It was dated 3 weeks ago, when I was in a blackout zone. Seeing my name scrawled by his hand made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a lie. It was a violation. He was stealing my life with a ballpoint pen. Henderson slid a glossy pamphlet across the wood. It was a listing for the farm, branded with a red, "Sold pending" sticker. The photos were taken recently. In one shot of the living room, I saw a stranger's coat on the rack. Henderson explained the open house happened yesterday. The text telling me to stay away wasn't about my stepmother's anxiety. It was to keep me from scaring off the buyers. They were staging a sale in the house I paid to heat. "We have 2 options," Henderson said, meticulously cleaning his glasses. "We can file a standard injunction, which takes weeks, or we can enforce the trust immediately." He looked at me over the wire rims. "Immediate enforcement means you take physical possession today." I thought about the Christmas Eve dinner they were hosting right now. I thought about the manipulation. I didn't want a long court battle. I wanted justice. I asked what enforcement looked like. He pulled a single sheet from a folder. It was a notice to vacate based on breach of trust. It felt aggressive, perhaps even cruel. Then I remembered the text message. "Get a hotel." He had thrown me away like garbage the moment I became inconvenient. My hand hovered over the document. This wasn't just business, it was necessary surgery. I had to cut the rod out to save the patient. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. I signed my name firmly right next to his weak forgery. Henderson took the paper back and stamped it with a heavy thud. "There is one more thing," he said quietly. "The luxury sedan your father leases. The dealership called." I frowned. "I didn't sign that lease." Henderson shook his head. "No. But he put the insurance policy in your name to get the military discount." My jaw tightened until it hurt. He was driving around in a heated leather seat, protected by my service record, while I sat in a cold rental. "Cancel the policy," I said, my voice flat. "Effective immediately." Henderson nodded and made a note. "I'll have the sheriff meet us at the property in 1 hour to serve the notice." I stood up. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, tactical clarity. I wasn't the daughter coming home for approval anymore. I was the owner coming to inspect my property. I checked my watch. It was 4 in the afternoon. The party was just getting started. I walked out of the office into the biting winter air. Snow was starting to fall, covering the gray streets in white. It should have been peaceful, but it felt like the quiet before an ambush. I got into my car and punched the familiar address into the GPS. Though I could drive it blindfolded, I wasn't going to a family reunion. I was going to an eviction. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life like a loaded weapon. The tires crunched over the snow, packed gravel, sounding like gunfire in the quiet night. The farmhouse wasn't dark or solemn. It was blazing with light like a cruise ship on a dark ocean. I didn't see the rusted pickup trucks of our neighbors, or the battered sedans of my cousins. The driveway was lined with sleek, unfamiliar luxury cars with city plates. This wasn't a family Christmas dinner. It was a showroom event. My father wasn't hosting a holiday, he was closing a deal. I didn't park in the overflow lot near the barn. I pulled my rental right up to the front porch. Blocking the exit for 3 Mercedes. Blocking the exit for 3 Mercedes. I killed the engine and stepped out into the biting wind. The sound of laughter and clinking glass drifted through the windows I had paid to insulate. It felt physical, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. I walked up the steps, my boots heavy on the wood. I shifted the heavy duffel bag on my shoulder. I didn't knock. I used my key. The door swung open, unleashing a wave of heat and the smell of roasting turkey. My father was there instantly, as if he had been guarding the perimeter. He wore a suit I had never seen, looking polished and desperate. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep hard enough to bruise. He hissed that I couldn't be here. his eyes darting to the guests behind him. He pleaded through gritted teeth for me not to ruin this for him. I wrenched my arm free and stepped around him into the foyer. The living room was packed with strangers holding crystal flutes of champagne. They looked at me with mild curiosity, seeing only a woman in jeans and a beanie crashing a black tie affair. My stepmother was by the fireplace, laughing too loudly at a joke made by a man in a velvet blazer. She froze when she saw me, her smile faltering like a candle blown out by a sudden draft. I walked to the stereo system in the corner, ignoring the whispers that trailed in my wake. I reached out and silenced the jazz playlist, plunging the room into an awkward, suffocating quiet. All eyes turned to me. My father rushed to the center of the rug, forcing a terrifyingly bright smile. He announced to the room that his daughter had made a surprise return from overseas. He tried to spin my invasion as a heartwarming reunion, but his hands were shaking. "It wasn't a surprise," I said, my voice cutting through his performance. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen mirroring icon. The 60-inch smart TV above the fireplace flickered, replacing the digital Yule log with my phone screen. I opened the text thread. The message, "Don't come to the house. Get a hotel," appeared in 4-foot-tall letters. The guests gasped collectively. My father's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. The lie was now broadcast in high definition. "She's unstable!" my father shouted, abandoning the charm offensive. He pointed a trembling finger at me, accusing me of abandoning the family for 4 years. I didn't flinch. I scrolled to the banking app on the screen, displaying the transaction history. "I sent $150,000 to this house," I said, keeping my tone deadly calm. "Show me where it went, Dad. It certainly didn't go to the roof or the taxes." The numbers on the screen didn't lie. I turned to the guests, locking eyes with the man in the velvet blazer. I asked if they were the potential buyers for the condo development. The room grew thick with tension. I told them that the man selling them this land didn't have the authority to sign the deed. I explained that the signature on their preliminary contracts was a forgery made while I was in a combat zone. The investors looked at my father with narrowing eyes. The cocktail party was officially a crime scene. "The trust has been revoked," I announced, holding up the paperwork Henderson had given me. "My father is no longer the life tenant. I am the sole owner of this estate, effective immediately." The man in the blazer set his champagne glass down on a coaster with a decisive click. He didn't say goodbye. He just signaled to his colleagues, and they began to move toward the door. The herd instinct took over. The guests streamed out, leaving half-eaten appetizers behind. The front door opened and closed repeatedly, sucking the heat out of the house. Within 2 minutes, the driveway was full of red taillights fading into the snow. The silence that followed was heavy and ringing. My stepmother sat on the sofa, weeping softly into her hands. My father stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the debris of his failed scheme. I looked down at the hardwood floor. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was finally standing on my own ground. The front door clicked shut, sealing us in a silence that buzzed like a faulty wire. My father adjusted his tie, silk slipping through sweating fingers. He didn't look at the ruin of his party. He looked at me with a terrifying mix of pity and rage. He walked toward me, hands out, claiming I misunderstood everything. He said the money was just resting in different accounts. He tried to touch my shoulder. I stepped back, putting the coffee table between us. I wasn't his daughter right now. I was the auditor. "Zoey, look at what you've done," he said, dropping to that reasonable tone that used to make me crumble. He gestured to the uneaten shrimp cocktail and the festive garland. He said family is messy, but we don't destroy each other over paperwork. He asked if I really wanted to ruin Christmas over a few clerical errors. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was trying to make me feel small. Like the ungrateful child throwing a tantrum. But I wasn't a child. I was a soldier who had seen real destruction. I walked to the window and pulled back the velvet curtain. Outside, the red and blue strobe of a cruiser cut through the falling snow. "That isn't a taxi," I said, pointing to the driveway. "That is Sheriff Davis. He has the eviction order I signed an hour ago." My father froze, his face twitching. I told him he had 24 hours to vacate. If he was here tomorrow at sunset, it wouldn't be a civil matter anymore. It would be criminal trespassing. A clerical error was now a legal mandate. My stepmother stood up, mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked from the window to my father. Confusion warring with horror. She asked about the money I mentioned earlier. She asked about the $150,000. My father waved her off, mumbling about business overhead. She screamed then, a raw sound that echoed off the high ceilings. She told him he said we were broke. She told him she had been buying groceries on credit cards. The united front shattered instantly. "I need a bridge loan," my father demanded, pivoting away from his crying wife. He looked at me with expectation, assuming the checkbook was still open. "Just until the closing. I can fix this," I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I told him there was no closing because there was no sale. I told him the Bank of Zoey was permanently closed. I wasn't going to finance his exit strategy or pay for his moving truck. He was on his own, just like I had been for 4 years. I pulled a screwdriver and a box of hardware from my duffel bag. I walked to the front door and knelt down. My father watched in disbelief as I began unscrewing the brass lock plate. The metal screeching against metal was the only sound in the room. I wasn't just changing the keys. I was physically dismantling his access. He shouted that this was his house. I didn't look up. I just kept turning the screw, tightening my grip on the reality of the situation. I was sealing the breach. The fight drained out of him, leaving him looking old and shrunken. He barked a command to my stepmother to grab the valuables. They scrambled like rats on a sinking ship. They didn't pack clothes or photo albums. They grabbed silver candlesticks, expensive liquor, and unopened gifts. It was revealing. They weren't mourning the loss of a home. They were salvaging the inventory. Stood by the door, holding the new keys, watching them strip the shelves of anything that could be sold off or pawned. An hour later, they were hauling bags out to the luxury sedan. My father threw his suitcase into the trunk with a violent thud. He paused by the driver's side door, trying to summon one last glare of intimidation. He told me I would regret this when I was lonely. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms against the cold. "Drive carefully," I said. "Since I canceled the insurance today, and the lease payments days ago, the finance company will be taking that car before the night is over." He slammed the car door, the sound down like a gunshot in the valley. The engine roared to life, and he spun the tires on the ice, desperate to escape the scene of his defeat. I watched the red taillights weave down the long driveway until they disappeared around the bend. The silence rushed back in to fill the void they left. It wasn't the heavy, anxious silence of before. It was the crisp, clean silence of a winter night. I closed the door and locked the new deadbolt. I turned back to the empty house, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. I walked up the stairs to my old bedroom, the place I had dreamed of returning to for 48 months. I opened the door, expecting my old quilt or my high school trophies. The room was unrecognizable. It was filled with chrome weights, a treadmill, and mirrors. They hadn't just moved my things, they had erased me. There was never a plan for me to come home. I sat on the bench, alone in the dark. The silence on the farm 1 year later was different. It wasn't a heavy quiet of abandonment. It was the hush of concentration. I walked through the barn, now insulated and warm, checking the clipboards hanging by the stalls. The gym equipment from my old bedroom was down here now, used by veterans relearning how to walk or trust their bodies. The smell of stale wine was gone, replaced by sawdust and fresh coffee. I wasn't just holding the deed anymore. I was holding space for people who actually needed it. The farm finally had a pulse. I walked back to the main house, stopping at the mailbox. Inside was a single envelope with familiar, jagged handwriting. No return address was listed, but I knew the script by heart. My father had been quiet for 6 months, but Christmas always brought out the beggars. I didn't open it to look for an apology I knew wasn't there. I didn't need to read his latest sob story about bad luck or unfair judges. I walked to the fire pit where logs were already crackling. I tossed the envelope into the flames. Watching the paper curl and blacken, I felt the last knot in my chest loosen. For years, I believed love was a transaction. A bill that had to be paid monthly to avoid disconnection. I thought if I just wrote a big enough check, I would finally be worth keeping. That lie had cost me a fortune. The truth was free. I didn't need to buy a seat at my own table. Standing there in the cold air, I realized my value wasn't in my bank account. It was in my backbone. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke my reverie. This time, it wasn't a parade of leased luxury sedans or strangers in velvet blazers. It was a convoy of beat-up trucks and jeeps. Doors flew open, and the noise was instant and chaotic. Jackson, my old squad leader, jumped out holding a cooler and a bag of ice. Sarah, who I served with in the sandbox, waved a roasting pan. They didn't bring judgment or expectations. They brought side dishes and loud, messy laughter. This was an invasion I actually wanted. The kitchen was a disaster zone of flour and peeling vegetables. Exactly how it should be. We moved around each other with the unconscious rhythm of a unit that had cleared buildings together. No one asked me to serve them. No one asked for a loan. We just worked. I chopped carrots while Jackson argued about the best way to carve a turkey. The air smelled of sage and roasting meat. A sharp contrast to the catering trays of last year. I looked around the room. I wasn't the infrastructure here. I was just part of the team. We sat down as the sun dipped below the pines, casting long shadows across the dining room. The table was mismatched, extended with a folding card table to fit everyone. I took the seat at the head, the spot my father used to lord over like a throne. I looked at the faces illuminated by candlelight, scars, laughter lines, and genuine warmth. I didn't check my phone. I didn't check my bank balance. I raised my glass. I didn't come home to the family I was born into. I came home to build the family I chose.